Hey guys, it's Charles Yeager for Tuts Plus. In this tutorial, we're going to take a look at how to create a space scene with Element 3D. There was a space scene I created about 3 years ago with a quick breakdown that I still get a lot of requests for. I'll have a link for the original video on this blog post. I recently went back and recreated another space scene using the same techniques. Let's go ahead and take a look at that one. So we're going to be recreating a space scene similar to that one. Now we are going to be using a few third-party plugins to create this scene. However, really the main one you need is Element 3D. You can be using either version 1.5 or version 2. We're going to also be using some free assets found online that will be available in the project file that you can download for this tutorial. This will be enough to get you started and you'll be able to follow along. For the best results though, I also recommend using the plugins Trapcode Shine and Optical Flares. I'll have links for these plugins in the blog description. With that being said, let's go ahead and get started. All right, now we're in After Effects, and I went ahead and imported in some of the assets from the project file. You can see some of these files here. We're going to go over some of these a little bit later. For the time being, let's go ahead and just create a new composition. I want this composition to be 1920 by 1080. I'm going to make it about 10 seconds long, and I'll just call it main comp. Now, the first thing we need to do with our space scene is just add some generic stars in the background. Now, these stars are going to be so far in the background, there's really not going to be any parallax with them. So they can actually be a still image, and that's what I've already created in the assets here. So if I just open this up, I've got a JPEG here. I'm just going to drag this into the composition. If I zoom in here, you can see this is just an array of stars, basically a star field, and I created this using Trapcode Particular. But again, there's really no need to bog down the computer rendering all of this with the actual plugin when you can just render out a still frame. So if you have Trapcode, you can go ahead and create your own star array. Or if you want to just follow along with this, you can use one of the 3-star images that I've got included with the project file. Again, because these stars are going to be so far in the background, there really won't be any parallax, and that's going to kind of help sell this is a very large scene. And again, it's not going to bog down our computer trying to render all these different plugins at once. So let's go ahead and create a 3D camera. I'm just going to right-click here and go to New Camera. And I'm going to have this camera be a 2-node camera and 24mm and click OK. And this may pop up saying that we don't have any 3D layers currently. Just click OK. And what we can do is select our stars image, and I'm going to go ahead and toggle the switches here, and we're going to go ahead and check to make that 3D. Now one thing we're going to need to do, if I click on the stars layer, I'm going to hit AA, and we can come down here and select Accept Lights and set that to off. We're going to make sure we need to do that on all of our 3D layers in this tutorial. If you have any layers that show up as completely black and you have lights in your scene, it's probably because that's not checked to off. So I'm going to go ahead and close that. Now let's go ahead and jump into a custom camera view so we can look at where we want to move our stars to. So I'm going to go to the custom camera view here. And if I zoom in here and just hit C on the keyboard, we can get to the orbit camera tool, and we can orbit around and we can see our stars background and we can see our virtual camera there. So what I want to do is I'm going to zoom out here and I'm going to select that stars background. Let's go ahead and move it really far back into Z space. And you can see our camera there, and I'm just moving this further and further back. You can hold shift to move it even farther quickly. And let's go back to our active camera view. And so now we can see our stars are really far in the background. We really can't even see them. So what we need to do in this case is select the stars background. I'm going to hit S on the keyboard for scale, and we're going to go ahead and scale this up until the size of it basically fills up our entire composition. I'm just dragging that up there. And what you're probably going to want to do, just go ahead and do this in advance, is make it a little bit larger than the actual composition, because we're going to have a little bit of slight camera movement a little later on, and we can go back and tweak this again, but you might as well just have it a little bit larger than your composition to begin with. Alright, so now let's go ahead and get started adding in some Element 3D asteroids. So I'm going to right click and go to New Solid. I'm just going to name this E3D for Element 3D, and I'm just going to click OK. And with that layer selected, I'm going to go over here to the Effects and Presets and just type in Element. And I'm going to apply that effect to our solid. And now let's go ahead and jump into the scene setup. All right, once we're in the scene setup, if you come up to the model browser, you're going to see a folder called version 1 models. Check that open and then scroll down to the starter pack. And you should have included 3 different rock models. Before we add them to our scene, I'm going to go ahead and click add to group off. And now we can just click on each one of these rocks to add them into the scene. Now if we look at these rocks, each of them have different textures. And I really like the texture on rock 3 the best. It looks the most like an asteroid. So I want to apply this texture to the other rock. So if I select rock 2, you can come down here to the scene materials and you'll see rock 3 there. I'm just going to drag and apply that to each one of the rocks. And in order to get a little more detail on these rocks, I'm going to select each one of them and I'm going to go down to the UV mapping, and under UV repeat, I'm going to set this on 2 and then just tab over and 2. So I want to do that for each one of the rocks. And make sure they're all on group 1. Once we have that set up, let's go ahead and click OK. And now we can see parts of our space scene starting to take shape. Before we do anything else though, we need to adjust a few settings and elements. So I'm going to come over here to the render settings. And under physical environment, we want to adjust the lighting influence all the way to 100% because we only want the lights we create affecting the asteroids and nothing to do with the environment map. The other setting we need to adjust is under the camera cutoff. We want the near plane to be 1. And for the camera far plane, we want to max that out. I think it's 2 million is the max. So I'm just going to type in 2 million. And that'll just ensure that none of the models get cut off when they get really far away from our camera. Now I'm going to go ahead and close up the render settings, and let's come up here to group 1. And let's go ahead and start creating our asteroid field. So under particle replicator, I'm going to change the replicator to be a 3D grid. I'm just going to move this over a little bit so we can see these options a little bit better. And I'm going to set the grid up at 3, 3, and then for Z, I want to put 16. I'm going to go over here to the custom camera view real quick. I'm going to turn on transparency just so we can kind of see what's going on here. And I'm also going to turn off the star's background layer for the time being. And now we can see we basically just have a group of asteroids. So we need to scale this out. So for scale shape, I'm going to set that at 125. That'll kind of give us more of an array of asteroids. And for the Z scale here, I'm going to set that at 9. That'll really help pull those out. Now we can see we kind of have a belt of asteroids. And there's our camera right there in the center. Now under replicator effects, let's go ahead and adjust the scatter here. I'm going to set the scatter at 35. I'll just add in a lot more randomness there. Now we can go ahead and adjust some of the particle look. So if we come down here under particle look, for particle size random, I'm going to set this at around 30%. And for particle rotation, we want to go ahead and randomize the entire rotation. So I'm going to set that at 4 complete rotations. And you can see we get lots of randomization there. And now if you need to, you can come back up here and adjust the overall random seed if you want to get a couple different looks. Now let's go back to our active camera view real quick. And I kind of want to angle the asteroids kind of coming from the side. So if we come here to the particle replicator, we can go ahead and adjust the rotation here. On the y-axis, I'm just going to set this around a negative 10 or so. Negative 12 looks pretty good there. I may move the entire replicator over to the right a little bit more. Now what we need to do is we need to move all of the asteroids actually in front of our camera. So we need to move them back in Z space. So if we go to our custom camera view, we can see there's our camera. So I'm going to zoom out really far here. So we're basically right in the middle of our asteroid belt for the time being. So let's go ahead and move this back in Z space. So it's right in front of the camera. You can see there's our camera, there's our asteroids. We're probably going to need to move this over a little bit on the X and Y axis. Let's go back to our active camera view. And we'll just move this over so that they're right in front of the camera. That looks pretty good. Again, if you need to change up your look a little bit more, you can come down to the random seed and just kind of scroll through until you see something that you like. All right, I think that looks pretty interesting. I'm going to turn my stars background back on. And I want to go back to the custom camera view to make sure the asteroids aren't actually passing through the stars. So I'll turn on the alpha channel. And so it's pretty close. So I'm probably going to move the stars background a little bit further back. I'm just going to hold shift and drag that back so that it's really far in the background. So now you can basically see we have our stars background and the asteroids. And there's our camera. Let's go back to the active camera view and turn back off transparency. Now since we moved our stars further back, we need to scale them up a little bit more again. You can see the edge there. We need to make sure that covers the entire composition. So like that. All right, now that we have that set up, the next thing we can do is go ahead and add in some actual NASA photos. On NASA's website, they have a very large space image library that you can take advantage of and use images for your projects. The reason for this is because the majority of these images are available via Creative Commons. I'll have a link for where you can access these images on the blog post for this tutorial, and I'll also have a few included with the project file. I've went ahead and already downloaded one of these images, and I'm just going to drag it into the composition. And you can see it's kind of this galaxy image. I'm going to hit S to scale that down just a little bit here. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to mask out that galaxy. So I'm just going to select the masking tool, make sure Roto Bezier is on. That way it'll kind of round off the edges. And I'm just going to click around this galaxy. And once I've got that cut out, I can go ahead and make any adjustments I need to. I'm going to hit MM on the keyboard. And I'm going to adjust the mask feather here just a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and rename this galaxy so I know what it is. And if you don't want your galaxy to be the same color as the original NASA image, you can easily apply some color effects to it. So I'm going to apply a hue and saturation. I'm going to drag that effect on the galaxy, and I'm just going to adjust the master hue here until it's a color I like. So I kind of want it to be a little more orange. So something like that looks pretty good, and I'm going to go ahead and make that 3D. And I'm going to need to hit AA on the keyboard and also make sure that Accept Lights is turned off on that layer. And let's go ahead and go to a custom camera view, and we want to move this really far back behind our asteroids, pretty close to our space background. One thing we want to do is actually put this layer below our Element 3D layer, so it's actually behind the asteroids when it gets rendered. So I'm going to go ahead and select and move that far back in Z space. I'm going to hold Shift again to move that back really quickly. And so now we can see that's behind our asteroids. I'll go back to our active camera view, and we can reposition it from this view. And obviously it's a lot smaller now, so I'm going to hit S on the keyboard and scale that up. And I'm going to rotate it. Now this looks pretty good, but we also need some nebulas and other things in the background to make this look a little more interesting. Now a while back I came across a website that lets you kind of create these neon flame fractals in your web browser. And when I was working with this website, I realized these would make really great space nebulas. And so I'll go ahead and demo that here. So I just click and drag around. This may be a little difficult to see with the compression of this tutorial, but it's creating these nice space fractals. And you can choose your color and just you click around and drag and create your own custom fractal neon flames essentially. But what's also cool is you can also tweak the settings to get really fine-tune your image. And then you can go ahead and download that image, and it will download as a PNG image with a black background that we can obviously then use with a screen mode. Again, I'll have a link for this website in the blog description. So let's jump back over to After Effects. And I went ahead and already rendered out a few different space shots that I created. So I'm going to go ahead and drag that into the composition. And you can see we have this nice space nebula. So I want to move that down in front of the galaxy there, and I'm also going to make it 3D. And so let's go back to our custom camera view, and we also want to move this layer back here with our galaxy. So with that selected, I'll just hold Shift and pull that back in the background. Now let's go back to our active camera view, and I want to go ahead and set that space shot to be a screen mode. So I'm just going to toggle the switches here. With that layer selected, I'll hit screen mode. And now I'm going to hit S on the keyboard to scale that up. And now you can see we're getting this nice space nebula in the background. And you can reposition and rotate that however you like. So I'm just going to move that around to a place that I like it. And if you want, you can go ahead and select that layer and hit Control-D, Command-D on a Mac, and you can duplicate it. And then you can just rotate that. And you can go ahead and add in as many as you like. Now once you've already added in one, a little trick you can use if you want to add in multiple different ones, go ahead and select one you already have in your shot. I'm going to hit Control-D to duplicate it again. And with it selected, I'm going to come here to another one, and I'm going to select it, and I'm going to hold Alt on the keyboard, and I'm going to click and drag that one down and place it directly on top of that duplicated one. And you can see that's just going to replace it. And the benefit of this is now it's already in a screen mode, it's already way back in the background in 3D space where it needs to be, and all we need to do is just move it into position. So I'm just going to adjust the scale of this one back down a little bit. And the reason I like using multiple colors is because we're going to have different light sources here. Essentially, these nebulas are going to be our light source. So we're going to have this galaxy back here and a little bit of color accents coming from the orange and the teal, so kind of a more of a cinematic aesthetic. And they also kind of serve as practical light sources for our scene. So let's go ahead and create some lights here. So I'm going to right-click and create a new light. And I want this to be a parallel light. And this will be light 1. This will be our main light. And for the color, I'm just going to use the color picker and select kind of in this orange color range here on that nebula. And for intensity, for the time being, I'll just set it at 100. And so right off the bat, we can see this is illuminating our asteroids from the wrong direction. They're being lit from the back side here, and we want them to be lit from the angle of this nebula. So I'm going to go to the custom camera view. And I'm just going to click and drag this light to be on the opposite side. So now you can see it's pointing in the other direction. So let's go back to my active camera view. All right, this looks pretty good. You can now see the light is coming from the back side of the asteroids, and it's kind of providing a nice edge light, and that's exactly what we want. But we can kind of fake this to accent our asteroids the best way we see fit. Now, one thing I just noticed, you'll notice the nebulas are all disappeared, and that's because I didn't set them to not accept light. So I'm going to go ahead and select each one of these, hit AA, and turn accept lights to off. So again, if you have any layers disappear, this is usually the reason. All right, so I'm gonna select that light again. Let's go ahead and just move this around until we get kind of a nice edge light that we think looks good. And we can adjust the intensity here. I just hit AA on the keyboard to bring up the intensity. I'm gonna go ahead and adjust where that galaxy is. All right, that looks like a good edge light. Let's go ahead and add another parallel light to use an accent of a blue light. So I'm going to right click and go to New Light. Again, with a parallel light, I'm going to select the color picker and select kind of this blue color here. And click OK. Now let's go back to our custom camera view and move it into position. So I'm just going to rotate that light around. Let's go back to our active camera so we can kind of see where the light's coming from. All right, so we want the light source to be kind of coming from this direction off this edge. And this is nice because it's kind of illuminating the asteroids from both sides. So kind of the back and to the left, and this will be kind of coming more from the right-hand side. I might dial back the intensity just a little bit on the second light and hit AA on it and just bring the intensity down to about 35%. Because obviously this wouldn't be as dominant of a light source as this galaxy and the other orange nebula. All right, let's go ahead and go back to our Element 3D layer and adjust a few more settings, kind of fine tuning. So I've got that Element 3D layer selected. And let's go down here to the render settings. And one thing I like to add onto this would be some fog. So that way the depth, the asteroids kind of fade as they go farther back. So I'm going to open up the fog settings and I'm going to use the fog color. And I'm just going to select kind of a blackish gray color back here in the background. And I'm going to enable fog. And you can see currently it's affecting all of the asteroids and we don't want it to actually do that. So we want to go to fall off type and select exponential. And for the fog opacity, we want to set this around 75%. And then we can also adjust the fog start distance. So if I just pull this back, we can see it's kind of affecting only the farther asteroids, and that looks pretty good. So I'm going to set this to be around 6,000. And I may dial that up just a little bit more. So it's very subtle, but it is a nice effect. Now I'm going to go ahead and set this back on full resolution. One thing you may notice on your asteroids with these parallel lights, it's very harsh on the sides. You may get a lot of unwanted jaggy moire effects on the sides of your asteroids. So what we can do is just come down here to the output. And under super sampling, go ahead and crank that up to either 2 or even 4. You can see that gets a lot better as we dial that up. So I'm just going to zoom in here just to show you the difference. So this is on 0. And this is on 4. So it's just going to smooth things out, make things look a lot better. And if your computer can handle it, you can also check on enhanced multi-sampling. And that just makes things look a little bit nicer as well. Again, that's going to add a lot more to your render. So once you do this, you may want to come down here under render mode and select preview while you work. And then before you render, go ahead and set that back to full. And that's what I'm going to do here. I'm going to leave that on preview and I'm going to set this back to half. All right, so what we've created so far is really the core of our space scene. So now we want to go ahead and add in some light rays and some optical flares and things like that to really accent this space shot. Now, if you don't have any other third-party plugins, you can use some of the stock plugins in After Effects. There's a flare effect, and there's also a CC light rays effect that you could also kind of use in place of trap code shine and optical flares. Now, there is a little drawback to those. They don't work quite as well with movement in the shot. They tend to have a lot of flickering. but you can definitely feel free to experiment and try out different things and apply various color grading effects to your shot to make it look its best. Right now I'm going to go ahead and start using some of these other effects such as trap code shine and optical flares. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new adjustment layer. Right click, new adjustment layer. And I'm going to name this shine. And with that layer selected, I'm going to come here to the effects and presets and apply the effect shine to it. And so what I want to do is I want to move the source point. I'm going to leave it on 2D because we're not going to have that much camera movement in the shot. But I want to move that source point to really be right where the center of that galaxy is. And I'm going to leave the ray length at 4. Under shimmer, I'm going to set this to be about 120. That'll add a nice shimmering effect as the camera moves slowly. Now under colorize, I want to go ahead and match the actual colors in our scene. So I want to make this be a nice orange color. Alright, that looks pretty good. I might boost it a little bit with the blend mode here and set it on an add blend mode. You can see it makes it a little bit brighter. This gives us some really nice light streaks and light atmosphere that accent very well off of the asteroids. Alright, so another effect that I did in the original space shot I created was some kind of subtle smoke accents using some stock smoke footage. So if you have any footage of just kind of smoke or atmospheric effects, you can overlay these into your shot to add just a little bit more depth to your scene. There's plenty of free smoke assets online, or if you have some with the Action Essentials pack from Video Copilot, that's what I actually have. And again, this is not something you have to do, it is something I did in the original shot, so I'll go ahead and show you that. So I've got this shot of some atmospheric smoke. I'm just going to drag that into my composition. Now with that shot selected, I'm going to go ahead and make it 3D. And I'm going to need to hit AA on the keyboard and turn accept lights off. And now let's go ahead and go to a custom camera view. And now if we just rotate around here a little bit, you can see that smoke atmosphere is really close to our camera, and that's what we want. We just want it to be basically right in front of our camera. And this is just going to add a little bit more dimension to our shot, a little bit more parallax right in front of those asteroids. So go back to the active camera view. Now the position where everything is does matter, so you're going to want to make sure your atmosphere is in front of the shine effect and the element 3D effect. So you can kind of see that subtle smoke right here. So if I just move down in time, I'll find an area that looks pretty good with the smoke, and I can move it up. So that's a pretty good area right there. So I'm going to right click and go to time, freeze frame, because we actually don't want the smoke moving because we just want it to look kind of like space dust essentially. So what we can do now is I'm going to go ahead and lower the opacity. I'm going to hit T with that layer selected for opacity and just kind of lower that just so it's a very nice subtle accent there. And when we'll be able to see this is when the camera moves a little bit later. So if I just go ahead and move it now a little bit, you can see we get a nice subtle bit of parallax there. So I'm going to undo that movement. Now we go ahead and start adding in some optical flares into our shot. So I'm just going to come up here and right click and do a new solid. And I'm just going to name it flare. Make sure it's comp size and click OK. Now with that layer selected, I'm going to go here and add optical flares to it. Now I want the flare to actually be in 3D space, so I want to turn the visibility of it off for just 1 second, and I'm going to right click here and add a new light. And I want it to be a point light, and I'm just going to name it letter A, capitalized, and flare. And the reason we're going to do that is because we're going to tell the optical flares to track on all the lights that have the letter A at the beginning. And for the intensity, I'm going to set it to 0, and the color really doesn't matter, but just for the sake of consistency, I'm going to set it to be white. And click OK. So now we can see we have our little point light here. What we need to do is move that back in Z space where that galaxy is. So let's go to our custom camera view. And now we can see it right here in front of our camera. So I'm going to zoom out really far. And I'm going to select that light. And holding shift, I'm going to pull it really far back here. So it's basically lined up with that galaxy. Doesn't have to be exact. As long as it's behind your asteroids, it should look correct. So I'm going to go back to my active camera view, and I'm just going to continue to move that into position. Basically right in the center. That looks pretty good. So now let's go ahead and turn our flare layer back on with visibility. And let's adjust some of these settings here. So I'm going to go to the options here. And in the presets browser, I'm just going to use one of the presets from the Pro Presets pack. And I'm just going to scroll down here and use this one called Sahara. It's got a nice ring to it and it'll look pretty nice in space. Let's click OK. And I want to set this to be on transparent. And I'm going to toggle the switches here and set this to be a screen mode. And now let's adjust these other settings here. So for the position, for the source type, I want that to be track lights. And it'll say select lights. We want it to be on anything that has the name of A. And then I want to disable all of these settings here. And for the time being, it's going to look like it disappeared, but we need to just adjust the scale here. So I'm going to set this at 1900. And now we can see that flare coming through quite nicely. We can go ahead and adjust the brightness if we need to. I may drag this down to be about probably 50%. Looks pretty good. And I also want to add a little bit of flicker to this. So under the flicker options here, I'm going to set this to be 10 and the amount to be 20, just so it's very subtle. So currently our flare layer is in front of everything, and sometimes I like to do it either in front or behind the asteroids, or do it with both. So I'll go ahead and show you what happens when we do this. So right now, again, it is in front of everything. I'm going to hit Control-Shift-H to disable the visibility of the lights and the mask. That way we can see things a little clearer. So if I actually move the flare layer below the element layer, you're going to see this nice effect it gives the shot. You can see how it really accents the asteroids and everything else and doesn't wash them out quite as bad. So what I like to do is I'm just going to leave that flare there, and I'm going to select the flare and do Control-D to duplicate it. And I'm going to move another copy of it above everything. That way, essentially, I have two different flare layers. So now we're getting this really nice bright accent. And we can adjust the brightness of each one of these to kind of fit the shot. So on this top flare, I can bring the brightness down quite a bit. And if I'm getting overpowered too much with the back flare, I'm going to go ahead and select it and adjust the brightness on it as well. But overall, I think that looks pretty good. So if we need to at this point, we can add in a little bit of a color grade. So I'm just going to right click here and do a new adjustment layer. I'm going to move that above everything. And I'm just going to apply a curves effect to that. So I'm going to select that effect, add it to the adjustment layer. I'm just going to name this CC for color correction. And if we zoom in here, I'm just going to darken this up just a little bit. So let's go ahead and add in some bars on top of this to make it look like a 2:3:5 aspect ratio. So in the assets, if you can download the project file, I've included an aspect ratio PNG. So I'm just going to drag this and add it over top of the composition. Just going to give our footage that widescreen look, and that was again something I did in the original shot. So now all we have left to do is add in just a little bit of subtle camera movement, and the less you do will actually have more of an effect, because it's going to make the scene seem a lot larger. If we have this camera moving very quickly around all of these asteroids, it's going to kind of downsell the scale of everything. So I'm just going to come down here and select my camera. I'm going to open up the options here for it, and under transform, I'm going to set a keyframe for the point of interest and the position, and I'm going to move to the very end of my composition. And I'm just going to hit C on the keyboard to bring up the orbit camera tool, and I just want to rotate this very slightly. So something kind of like that. That's really it. That was hardly any movement at all, but it's going to actually have quite a pronounced effect at the end of this. So I can just scroll through here, and you can see it's a very nice subtle camera movement. As we do that, I see the flicker from the flares looks to be a bit intense, so I'm going to select the flares, and I'm actually going to turn the flicker off. I'm going to do that on both of the flare layers. If we need to, we can also adjust the opacity of our atmosphere layer. So I'm going to hit T on that and just kind of adjust that a little bit. And now at this point, you can go ahead and do any extra color grading or post effects to your footage. You can also add in some film grain, anything else you want to accent your shot. I like overlaying some film grain because it makes the shot look a little more natural and also break up any potential color banding you might get if you upload this to YouTube or Vimeo. Alright guys, hopefully you enjoyed this tutorial. Maybe picked up some tips for creating your own space scene with Element 3D. Make sure you download the project file. It's going to have some of the space assets that I created for this tutorial. This is Charles Yeager for Tuts Plus. Thanks for watching.